When you see a dominant force come into MMA, you can't help but matchmake and see what he might do later in his career. Khamzat Chimaev is one of these special talents that has MMA fans around the world already proclaiming him a future champ.
How many fighters in the MMA division? I can smash all the whole division.
However, one of those divisions is currently ruled by Israel Adesanya, who has been a force in his own right at 185 pounds.
And still!
So we wanted to look into our crystal ball and see what might happen if these two generational talents met inside the UFC octagon with the middleweight title on the line. Here is the fight breakdown of Israel Adesanya versus Khamzat Chimaev. Israel Adesanya. Stylebender has a strong claim to be considered the best striker in all of MMA. His record stands at 23-1 with 15 KOs. One of those 15 KOs came during the middleweight unification bout at UFC 243, where he knocked out Robert Whittaker in the second round.
Gotta be very careful.
Since then, Adesanya has successfully defended the belt 5 times, including setting the record for the most knockdowns in UFC title fight. Adesanya also has the second longest winning streak in the UFC middleweight division history and the second most title fight wins in the UFC middleweight division history. So in order to find someone with a better middleweight resume than Adesanya, you'd have to go back and look at the legend Anderson Silva. But where Silva cemented his legacy over 6 years, Adesanya has done it in 4. Adesanya made his UFC debut in 2018 and won 8 fights in the middleweight division in quick succession. This included wins over Marvin Vettori, Kelvin Gastelum, Robert Whittaker, Yoel Romero, Paulo Costa, and Anderson Silva. After a little stumble at light heavyweight, Adesanya has moved back to the middleweight division to continue his reign as he has defended Vettori, Whittaker, and Jared Cannonier in the past year and a half and looks to take on perhaps his greatest challenge in Alex Pereira. However, another challenger awaits in the shadows to get a crack at Stylebender. Nicknamed Boars, Khamzat Chimaev hunts for his own place in the MMA history books. Khamzat Chimaev. Now, perhaps the greatest prospect in MMA history, Khamzat Chimaev has taken over the UFC in a flash. But if you look at his record at 12-0, you might not fully understand what the hype is about. The picture only starts to become clear the more you look at his competition and what he has done to them, while having relatively little MMA experience. Chimaev made his UFC debut with a 6-0 record with all finishes. He had 2 fights in the UFC within a 10-day span, making it the quickest turnaround between UFC wins in the modern era. The first came against John Phillips, who he choked out in the second round after dominating him in the first, and the second came against Reese McKee, who seemed to be there just for Chimaev to show off as he TKO'd him in the first round.
Just when I say that. Stop. It's another win for Khamzat.
MMA fans were salivating to see Chimaev fight again, and they wouldn't have to wait long as he took on Gerald Meerschaert 2 months later, but the fight only lasted 17 seconds as Chimaev KO'd Meerschaert with just 1 strike. However, Chimaev had an awful bout with COVID, after where he actually announced his retirement before being convinced to fight again, and he wouldn't fight for over a year. But when he finally stepped back into the UFC octagon, he reminded everyone why people considered him a 2-division champion threat as he utterly dominated Li Jingliang and submitted him in the first round. In his first 4 UFC fights, Chimaev took 1 significant strike, but that would change when he matched up with former welterweight #1 contender Gilbert Burns. Burns and Chimaev put on a Fight of the Year candidate as Chimaev was tested like he had never been before. But despite his inexperience, he managed to defeat Burns in a close decision. This set him up for a farewell fight with Nate Diaz. The bout fell through, however, when Chimaev failed to make weight. Yet in a day's notice, Chimaev was then matched with Kevin Holland, who once again failed to land a strike on Chimaev before being submitted. After the weight miss, fans believe that it's inevitable that Chimaev will move up to middleweight and challenge for the title. But unfortunately for Chimaev, another generational talent waits for him there. Striking. Even before Chimaev's fight against Gilbert Burns, the striking edge would have clearly gone to Adesanya, but it was cemented after the success that Burns had. The reality is that Adesanya is the most successful kickboxer to transition to MMA. His 80-plus kickboxing fights have helped him develop a superior stand-up game that leaves his opponents in a daze, as they are not only unable to land significant damage on Adesanya, but often find themselves dealing with clean and precise punches, knees, and kicks, and eventually succumbing to them. Currently, Adesanya has an average of 3.93 significant strikes landed per minute on nearly 50% accuracy, while 81% of his offensive game is striking focused. Now, while Chimaev does have a significantly larger strike landed per minute than Adesanya at 7.3, the majority of these strikes are in ground and pound form. However, one fight that we can look at and dissect Chimaev's stand-up game is his performance against Gilbert Burns. That was primarily a stand-up battle for 3 rounds, where Chimaev landed 108 significant strikes on a 48% accuracy, but he also absorbed 119 significant strikes on 60% accuracy from Burns. In these exchanges, we saw Chimaev visibly get tired from the high pace and his technique, both offensively and defensively, break down to the point where he was rocked a few times by Burns. Of course, Adesanya famously had a similar situation with Kelvin Gastelum, but when Adesanya was tired and rocked, his technique didn't falter because of all the stand-up reps he had performed over the years, making that part of the game second nature to him.
Oh my goodness. Huge right. Knockout for Adesanya now.
Just like grappling is second nature to Chimaev. Grappling. So if you really want to look at it, this is a classic wrestler versus striker matchup. You could almost compare it to UFC fights back in the day, but with both athletes having a claim to being the best at each discipline in MMA history. Chimaev averages nearly 4 takedowns per 15 minutes with an accuracy of 57%. Compare this to the average UFC takedown rate of 1.52, and you start to see the kind of grappling phenom that Chimaev really is. On top of that, only one fight has gone 15 minutes, the rest have all ended either in first round or early second. In these fights, Chimaev only needed 1 or 2 takedowns to thoroughly control his opponents and land vicious ground and pound. Remember, the 7.3 significant strikes landed per minute? Well, that matters now. Meanwhile, Adesanya doesn't have an offensive wrestling game, but he does have a 78% takedown accuracy. The takedown was his major downfall against Jan Blachowicz, who took Adesanya down 3 times on 5 attempts and gave him his one lone loss. But since then, Adesanya has shown improved takedown defense as he stuffed 10 of Vettori's 14 takedown attempts. And the 4 that he did manage, Adesanya got back to his feet quickly, while Adesanya stuffed 6 of Whitaker's 10 attempts. So clearly, Adesanya has been putting the time on the mats and getting better at wrestling. But compared to Chimaev, he has a long way to go. Additionally, Adesanya's striking game depends on leg kicks heavily, which might cause the middleweight champ trouble as Chimaev could easily catch a leg kick and takedown style bender. So it'll be interesting to see how Adesanya has to adjust his striking game in order to avoid a grappling contest with Chimaev. Submissions. Chimaev also has a significant submission edge on Adesanya. Chimaev attempts 3.5 submissions per 15 minutes, while the UFC average is only 0.56. And Chimaev does it in quick and devastating fashion. Just ask Kevin Holland, who is a BJJ black belt, but couldn't stop Chimaev from submitting him in just over 2 minutes. So if this fight does go to the ground, Adesanya won't just have to deal with Chimaev's ground and pound, but will have to keep his neck and limbs safe as the Chechnyan superstar will look to add another submission win to his resume. The X Factor. For Adesanya, the X factor is simple and obvious. It has to be improving scrambling and takedown defense. The reality of the matter is, just like Chimaev has a poor shot at winning a stand-up battle with Adesanya, Adesanya has a poor chance of winning a grappling match with Chimaev. So he'll have to fight Chimaev off of him, especially in the first round. So his wrestling defense has to be on point. While for Chimaev, his X factor will be his takedown entry and cardio. Chimaev is known for putting a pace on his opponents that can break them, but we saw that Gilbert Burns was able to keep up with Chimaev, and it was Chimaev who was getting tired from all the action, which resulted in striking mistakes. There is no way Chimaev can make those mistakes with a striker like Adesanya, so he'll have to work on his takedown entries, which are already superb, and turn this fight into a grappling contest quickly, which will not only give him a better shot at finishing, but will preserve his cardio, as that avenue of fighting is something that he's used to. Prediction. Now, there are no official fight odds about this contest, as it is more of a fantasy fight, but one that could turn into reality as soon as next year. So for our prediction, we see either Adesanya surviving some tough situations in the first and second round, and then wearing Chimaev down with accurate strikes to the body and head before finishing him late in the 4th or 5th round. Or Chimaev being the force of nature he is and continuing his freakish performances by taking the middleweight champ down early in the first round and catching Adesanya in a choke and ending it via a submission. So if you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit the little bell beside it so that you're notified the next time we upload a new video. With that being said, you just watched us break down a potential upcoming middleweight title fight between Israel Adesanya and Khamzat Chimaev. See you next time.